Put it on autopilot.
Okay, my name is Barbara Love, and I'm delighted to have the opportunity to share with you this afternoon. Our topic is working together across boundaries, developing relationships across boundaries, and it's somebody will remind me not to stand in front of the screen. Working together, building relationships across race and culture. And I'm going to move back and forth because I'm going to, and I have no idea what's on the screen. Oh, yeah, I do. There it is. So I want to talk about some specific guidelines and suggestions that I have for you about developing relationships across boundaries. But first, I want you to take a look at the screen and notice what you see. And notice what thoughts come into your mind when you look at this slide. So tell me, what thoughts come into your mind? I'd like to hear from a couple of people. What thoughts come into your mind when you look at this slide?
Well, automatically the issue with the NFL and them taking the lead during the national anthem.
Okay.
Issue with the president.
NFL taking the knee, issue with the president, yes.
The fact that most of the images that we've seen surrounding that issue have been not of white people.
There you go.
That he is showing a great deal of courage.
Oh, I'm struck by the fact that he's really bringing the issue so much closer to the president, where it's even harder to ignore. He's putting it right in his face.
Right there.
That he's one individual exercising patriotism.
Right.
Okay, you made all my points. It takes courage to do this. It takes courage to stand against division, separation, alienation, and that is our historical legacy. And we have an historical legacy that would get in the way of making relationships across race and culture. It takes courage to stand against a national rhetoric from the highest levels that reinforce separation, alienation, division. And what you want to do at CCL requires getting people together, requires being able to make those relationships. So you have set yourselves up for a task that requires enormous courage. So this is one of my favorite slides these days. And it's not just a man takes the knee. I label this slide, a white man takes the knee. A white man dares, in the midst of all these other white people, facing somebody on a balcony from the White House who's fanning the flames of division, and he dares to take the knee. So I'm done. You can go home. Okay. Yeah, there you go. That's my whole story. So contemporary and historical factors would get in the way and would tell you it's too tough, it's too hard, you're going against the grain, you're just one person. What can you do? The problem is too big, my boat is too small, and yet you have decided that you are going to overcome this history. You made a decision, you're acting with intention, and you're doing what I called a planned intrusion into history. Now, I came across this term intrusion lately, and it's fascinating to me, and so I'm sharing it with you because I like it. and I have made the fit, even though it might not seem to fit in the first place. But intrusion is like, okay, first let me ask, I know what I needed to ask. Who was at the presentation that I gave here last year? Okay, so you're going to hear a lot of things again that you heard last year, but it'll be okay. Second, who knows what intrusion means? Or who has experience with this concept, especially in the sciences? Excellent, no hands. So I can say what I want to and you can't contradict what I'm going to say. Okay, intrusion, and I love this example because the example is of rock formations in the earth and something inserting itself, often water inserting itself and displacing the rock. Intrusion into a sturdy formation. That's what you're into. That's what you're doing. You've got a history and a collection of contemporary forces that say separation, division, alienation, let's don't talk to each other, let's feel separated from each other, let's hate each other, essentially. And you are inserting yourself into that and saying, nay, no, that is not what we're about. So when you're feeling like it's difficult, when you're feeling like it's hard, remember rock is. Now, that was one of my profound statements for today. Rock really is hard. And if you're inserting yourself into rock, and if it feels difficult, then, all right, you're on the right track. So you're trying to create the conditions that enable you to create, you're trying to create the conditions that enable you to create legislation that moves us forward around the issue of climate change. And in order to do that, you need to develop relationships with a broad variety of people. So today we want to answer the question of what makes it difficult? What are the challenges? What are some of the specific things that can help you be more effective in your efforts to make relationships across race and culture? So I'd like you to do something with me. I want to say something about this term, people of the global majority. I use the term people of the global majority rather than the traditional term people of color, and I wanted to tell you why. The term people of the global majority is a term that is often, that I'm recommending be used instead of the term people of color, because when you use the term people of color, we're often referring to peoples of African heritage, Asian heritage, Latino heritage, often indigenous Native American heritage. And one thing, the question is this: what is one thing that you can say about that collection of peoples that is indisputably true? Pretty straightforward, right? They're the majority of the people on the planet. Europe constitutes less than 10% of the world's landmass and less than 10% of the world's people. And yet, in most of our conversations, we tend to refer to them as the majority. Isn't that an interesting phenomenon? It's such an interesting phenomenon. And nowadays, you can even read articles about organizations or school districts or places that are now majority-minority. Have you read such articles? Yeah. Majority minority, what an oxymoron. But that language tells you something, right? So what does that language tell you?
That no individual ethnic group.
I'm sorry?
That no individual ethnic group forms the majority in that specific area.
Okay, that's one thought.
That they're trying to hang on to something.
That they're trying to hang on to something?
A cultural bias in the description.
Yes. White perspective.
They've been historically in power.
We're talking about power. We are not talking about numbers. We're talking about power, position, and especially in relationships of domination and subordination, we're talking about who has position, status of dominant and superior. So when you use this term, or at least I hope when you use this term, people of the global majority, it will disrupt that thinking, because the thinking occurs so automatically that we have to have something that will sort of mix that up in our heads and make us think, oh yeah, what am I talking about here? Who am I talking about here? And specifically, how does the word or words that I'm using affect my goal here of being in relationships with people across race and culture? So the thing I want you to do is to take a few minutes to reflect on your history of relationships across race and culture. All right? Oh, let me see if there's any question about that term, people of the global majority. You, of course, are free to use whichever term you choose, and I'm simply recommending people of the global majority. Now, think for a moment, let your mind go back, and think about all the relationships that you've had with people from a different racial background, a different cultural background. And I want you to talk out loud with one other person about those relationships. Now, to do this, okay. Well, I'm thinking about whether or not I should ask people who identify as people of the global majority to talk to other people who identify as people of the global majority. And that would be useful, but I think it will be okay to do this exercise talking with each other where you sit. So I'm going to ask you to turn to the person sitting next to you or in front of or behind you, and then I'm going to walk you through the exercise. So get a partner, and once you get your partner, then I'm going to give you the next set of instructions. Okay, so get a partner. Once you get your partner, decide who is A and who is B. So you need an A and a B. All right? All right, now, I want my A's to raise your hand. A's, raise your hand. Who's A back there? Who's A? A's, raise your hand. Okay, B's, raise your hand. B's, raise your hand. B, 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 who's B back there? All right, great. Now, this exercise is what I will call a speak and listen, right? There will be, hopefully, opportunities for dialogue. I'm going to try to, not going to talk fast. I'm going to try to talk short so that there is some time for dialogue in the group. But right now, this isn't dialogue. This is speak and listen. One guideline before we begin the exercise, it's a guideline of confidentiality. So what I would ask is that anything that someone says besides their name during the course of this exercise, you will agree to not repeat what they have said. When it's said, it's finished. So you wouldn't repeat it to anybody who isn't here. You wouldn't repeat it to anybody who is here. You wouldn't even repeat it to the person who said it. So when this session is over, you wouldn't go up to the person you were talking to and say, you know that thing you said to me? Well, whatever, here's what I thought about it, or it reminded me, or whatever. If you want to talk about you, that's just fine. But do not repeat what someone else said, what your partner said. Is there a question about this guideline? Will you agree to this guideline? Thank you. Now, this is a speak and listen. When it is your turn, you will talk about your history of relationships across race and culture. When it is your turn to be the listener, you have a very important job. Your job is to look really interested in what your partner is saying. And here, this might be the critical part, the difficult part. No matter what they say, your job is to look pleased and delighted, no matter what they say. So what they say might sound to you like, oh my God, or horrible or terrible or tragic or whatever it is, and you get to keep looking pleased and delighted. Why, Barbara, do you want me to look pleased and delighted if somebody is saying something that sounds tragic? Well, because they're getting a chance to talk about it. And that's a good thing, because that's helping them clear out the emotional debris that will get in the way of their being able to have good relationships going forward. Because we're all carrying around an enormous amount of emotional baggage that gets in the way, that clutters up our relationships. And we don't have a lot of good places to sweep that out, to clear it out. So this is one short moment when you'll get a chance to look at what happened. So when you're the speaker, I want you to describe your earliest memory of being in a relationship with someone who is from a different racial, cultural background. Is there a question about what I'm asking you to do? Okay, Let's start with B. B, you're the speaker. A, you're the listener. You may begin. You'll have 3 minutes to describe this relationship. Okay, that's time. You find the end of your sentence. All right, then let's switch. B is the listener. A is now the speaker. You may begin. All right, that's time. That's time. That's time. So, how many of you were able to come up with a memory? You were able to come up with a memory. Okay. Now, I'd like to hear from a couple of people, not the story of what happened. So I don't want you to tell your story, but I'd like to know what you take from that experience. What's the lesson, or what's the message, or, yeah, what do you take from that experience? Let me see a couple of hands. 1, 2. Okay.
I found myself remembering when I was little, some of the earliest relationships that I had with people who I would probably now think of as people of the global majority. At the time, I didn't really see them as different because I was raised with, you know, what when I was a child was sort of the wisdom, what's the word? Everybody thought that you were supposed to be colorblind, and I guess I, you know, either internalized that or just hadn't really figured out racial differences when I was really little.
Well, I'm thinking of a time when I felt excluded and uncomfortable being around other people who, you know, well, the one person was came from a different background than I did, and then years later, as an adult, I realized, well, he was actually doing things to include me, and I didn't feel that at the time.
Okay. Sorry. How many of you recall having lots of relationships with people from different racial, cultural backgrounds? So some did, sort of. How many of you grew up in communities that you thought were multicultural? How many of you went to elementary schools that you thought were multicultural? How many of you went to faith-based organizations? Mm-hmm. Okay. How many of you went to high school? That you considered completely multicultural. Okay. Let me see. How many of you have doctors who are people of the global majority? How many of you have, I don't know, principal of your local high school who are people of the global majority? How about, let me see, dentists? Okay. How about governors? Okay. How about, let me see, how about mayors of your city or town? How about, let me think of one more. How about president? We want them back. We want them back. Yeah. Well, part of what I want you to notice is that you have had some experiences with, some of you have had some experiences with people from different racial and cultural backgrounds. But that isn't generally or typically the order of the day. And that isn't generally or typically how the society is organized. Basically, the society continues to be organized along class, along racial, ethnic, cultural lines. Who was it that said Sunday morning tends to be the most segregated time in America? And so on. We can still typically pretty much predict. I drive through neighborhoods and I say, oh, this is a black neighborhood. Oh, that's a white neighborhood. Somebody say, how can you tell? Well, you grew up in this society and so you can tell. My point is that this has had consequences. And some of the consequences have included, Stephanie, I might actually get you to come and do this for me. Some of the consequences include lack of information. Some of it is about disinformation. Some of it has resulted in implicit bias, stereotypes, and prejudices. But certainly, separation, alienation, disconnection with a healthy dosing of racism and xenophobia. None of these did we ask for. None of these did we consciously create, individually create, or choose. But they are nevertheless our cultural heritage, and we're having to deal with the consequences of that cultural heritage. So, what can we do? Well, I'm going to give you, at any given day, the numbers will change. But today, it's 9 guidelines for developing relationships across race and culture. So I'm going to talk about each of these in turn. So the very first thing is that you're going to have to seek out people from different backgrounds. So why is that an issue? Well, sometimes white people will avoid seeking out people from different racial and cultural backgrounds because they're hesitant about whether or not it's okay to do that. Since the point of segregation has been, and the consequences of segregation racism, the consequences of white supremacy racism has been targeting people specifically because of their racial identity, for many white people it seems a little odd or a little strange to identify or target people because of their racial identity. And so finding people and making relationships with them because they are members of a particular racial or cultural group might seem a little odd or strange. And yet I'm telling you, in order to build relationships with people from different cultural backgrounds, you're going to have to find them, and you're going to have to talk to them, and you're going to have to specifically, intentionally make relationships. If you keep doing what you've always done, you know that old saying, you'll keep on getting what you've always got. which will, and most of us have relationships with people pretty much like ourselves. So you're going to have to find them, you're going to have to organize your life so that if they are not typically in the circles in which you move, you're going to have to reorganize your life so that you are doing things that bring you into contact and relationship with people who are different from yourself. And you're going to have to say, I'm trying to interrupt the consequences of whiteness in my life. I'm trying to interrupt the consequences of separation, a history of separation and alienation between and amongst the races in my life. I'm trying to overcome that. Will you help me? Yep, you're just going to have to say it straight up. Because somebody might say, are you just trying to make a relationship with me because I'm black or because I'm Latino or because I'm an indigenous person or because I'm Asian? You're going to have to say, yeah. Because I was kept from having a relationship with you because. So yes, I'm trying to overcome that boundary. I'm trying to overcome that, and will you help me? Now, people of the global majority, you get to say yes, and you get to say no. And no is a complete sentence. You don't have to explain. You don't have to rationalize. You don't have to make it all right. You don't have to take care of the feelings of the person who has asked you this question. You don't have to make it up to them in any way, because you get to choose which relationships you want to be in. Now, the thing that I say to people of the global majority is this. You get to have relationships with white people on terms that work for you, and you get to do that remembering that environmental damage harms you. Doing something about climate change is in your best interest. None of us will do this well if we try to do it alone. Our best shot at doing something effectively and long-term will happen when we do it in relationship with each other. So as you are thinking about these relationships, think about how this is also in your own best interest. Climate change, environmental degradation, doing something about the environment is not a white people's issue. It's a people's issue. And I always remind people, God, who remembers Chernobyl? Chernobyl, I might not be saying it right, Chernobyl? Okay, good. Chernobyl. Okay. All right, thank you. I was going to say, am I that old? I'm really the only one who remembers this. Or how about 3 Mile Island? Okay. When the smoke came down, when the fumes, when the air came down from 3 Mile Island, it did not get to a black community to say, oops, let me go over you and come down on the other side because I'm just looking for communities in which white people reside. It affects everybody. And in fact, the people of the global majority are what I call on the forward edges of the most devastating damage currently being done by climate change. Yes, it is in our best interest to do something about this and to do it in relationships with other people. You're going to look for parity engagement. Now, specifically, and I didn't say this, I wanted to say that you'll notice that I'm saying there are guidelines for white people and there are guidelines for people of the global majority because our histories have been different and our experiences have been different. And so these guidelines attempt to take into account the ways in which the separation caused by racism has affected white people and the ways in which it has affected people of the global majority. So white people, remember, this is not a helping relationship, this is not charity work, this is not do-good work, because this is the way that white people have often been presented in relationship to people of the global majority in almost any literature that you pick up. It's always about the white people having and the people of the global majority not. The white people are doing and the people of the global majority are being done unto. That's not going to work. Has to be a relationship of parity, a relationship of equity. And creating such relationships requires that you as white people increase your capacity to have conversations and give up quizversations. Quizversations, I mean this experience where white people who want to get to know a person of the global majority, want to have a relationship with a person of the global majority, so they ask them 100 questions. They just keep asking questions. I call that a quizversation. And the person of the global majority will answer and will answer, and after a while they will start figuring out ways to get away from you. And the relationship is lost. Because even if you figure out a recoup, often it won't work because quizversations put you essentially in a dominant, up-down, one-up kind of relationship, and that's not going to work. So you're going to have to learn how to have conversations, which means parity, equity, not quizversations, and paying attention to the ways in which that conversation reestablishes patterns of domination and subordination, and figuring out how to interrupt that. Now, how do you interrupt that? White people often are not aware of the extent to which they have been socialized to be superior, to act superior, to sound superior, to act as though they know everything even when they're pretty sure they don't know anything, but they have to say things that indicate that they know everything, that they have the right answers, that they have the solutions, and above, by all means, they have to be the ones in charge. In just odd-off and I was going to say innocuous situations. I mean, situations that are completely don't matter about anything, but they still have to behave as though they're the ones in charge. Last year I told the story. I had just come back from some journey. I had been on the airplane. Some of you remember that story. I'd been on the airplane. I put my bag in the bin overhead, and I got my bag in the bin, and the white man in the seat across from me says, "Okay, now you can go ahead and close that up." Exactly who? I didn't say anything, actually. But my thought wasn't exactly, who are you? And who put you in charge of me today? It's like, just out of nowhere, he had to be in charge. He had to tell me what to do. Well, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to close the bin. I can't figure out what should be done next by myself. In other words, just in strange and odd situations, the socialization, the pattern of white people has been be in charge, know the answer, tell people what to do, and so on. So this pattern will overtake you without your knowing that it has overtaken you. And you're going to have to be on guard against it, and you're going to have to interrupt it when you see it happening. Don't assume it's not going to happen. It is. Be prepared to notice it, name it, interrupt it when it happens. And when you're in conversations with people of the global majority, don't be the one to go first. Or you can introduce yourself. Hello, my name is Barbara.
Hi, Barbara. Shelley.
And figure out ways to hold on and let the person of the global majority go first. It'll be an interesting experience. Go ahead and try it. Now, guidelines for people of the global majority: insist on relationships of parity and equity. Interrupt quizversations if they will happen, but don't take it personally. It's not something about you that caused this to happen. It's just a pattern that white people sometimes engage in. It's not meant to be harmful. Just interrupt it. Just say, you know, I would like to not have to answer a lot of questions right now. But I wouldn't mind having a conversation with you. Think of something. You'll think of something, but just interrupt it. And I encourage people of the global majority to take the lead sometimes. Share your ideas. Share your thinking. We are trained to hold back. We're socialized to be quiet. We're socialized to go invisible. Interrupt that socialization. We're trained to go subordinate. Interrupt that socialization. Take the lead. Interrupt the patterns of domination and subordination, and particularly when you find yourself easing, even without your intention, into the role of subordinate. And you can do that by just letting white people know. Now, the man on the plane, I simply looked at him and then sat down. I didn't figure I had to have a conversation with him that day. But you're looking to develop relationships because you want to engage in this project of doing something about climate change. So you'll want to say to the white people that you're involved with, you know, you don't have to tell me what to do. I'll be able to figure that out. And I might not figure it out quickly, but I will. Trust me. have confidence in my capacity to figure this out. You can tell them you don't have to know everything. Ease up on being white today. Something like that. You don't have to have all the answers, and you don't have to fix everything. You don't have to give directions, and especially you don't have to take charge. We can do this together, and it'll be all right. Really, it's going to be all right. Look for long-term commitment. And by long-term commitment, your desire to create the conditions that lead to legislation and so on that results in positive action toward climate change, toward the environment, has given you the motivation and the impetus to seek out these relationships, but don't let it stop there. Assume that if these relationships are going to happen, and if they're going to work, you're looking for long-term commitments. Don't just assume that when this project is over, it's adios, we're done, our relationship is finished. You're more likely to get the relationship that you want if you are looking for and aiming for long-term commitment. So be prepared to stay. That means through disappointment, through challenges, through difficulties, you are prepared to stay, because there will be challenges and there will be difficulties, there will be disagreements. How many of you have been in or now in a relationship with someone with whom you never had a disagreement? And yet, when disagreements occur in relationships across race and gender, across race and culture, we tend to get worried, we get scared, we back up, we leave them alone, and we assume that they might be insurmountable. Every relationship has challenges, and certainly these will have challenges. Regular, ordinary relationship challenges on top of the challenges that result from our history of separation and alienation. Be prepared to face those. Be prepared to notice them, name them, be present to them, and assume that you can work them through. Find your shared interest and don't run away when things get difficult. People of the global majority, remember this is for you too. You're not doing this on behalf of white people. You're not entering the relationship to please white people. You're doing it because you want to be in relationships that lead to effective change. All relationships take effort. Be prepared to put in the effort to make it work. And one of the things that often happens in relationships between people of the global majority and white people is that people of the global majority are expected to assimilate. They're expected to sound as much like white people, act as much like white people, think as much like white people, look as much like white people as possible, because that's what makes white people comfortable. Assume that you can stay in the relationship with a white person and be authentically yourself. And if you can't be authentically yourself, then this one is not going to work. Assume, however, that you can insist and continue to insist on being fully yourself in that relationship, because that's what makes a relationship meaningful, that you are able to bring your whole self to the relationship. People of the global majority will want to pay particular attention to this particular guideline because it's about keeping it a relationship of parity and equity and not sliding into the historic relationship of service. So, white people do not expect people of the global majority to service you. And people of the global majority take care of you and resist any expectation from others or any tendency on your part to slide into taking care of white people. White people resist the historic urge to expect things to be done for you, on your behalf, and don't look for people of the global majority to reassure you that you're a good white person. This is one of the things that white people often require of people of the global majority. See me, I'm doing good. I'm out here trying to do this work. Reassure me. That's not the work for people of the global majority. You're going to have to remember that you are a good human being, period. And it's not because you are doing this work. And you are doing this work, and you want to do it together. And you have to remember that on your own, not have people of the global majority carry this burden for you. People of the global majority, remember, you are a good human being. We are. Not because we're doing this work, but because we are good human beings. Now, I don't know if there are any other Baptists. Are there any other Baptists in the room? Baptists. I'm Southern Baptist. We didn't tell you that. I didn't tell you much about me. So I should have told you, I'm Southern Baptist. And I noticed that when I say we are good human beings, my tongue starts to get tough like that. Baptists don't believe that. Okay? Many of us come from traditions that tell us we're born in sin, to learn. I won't even repeat all those things that I learned as a Baptist growing up in the world. So to say we are good, period, is such a contradiction to me. And it might be for some of you. But I'm sharing that idea with you. I hope you will hold on to it. And if you know that we are good human beings, then you know that we belong together. You know that we can do this work together. You know that there really is, other than the history that has given us a particular legacy, no reason why we can't do it together. So, people of the global majority, remember that that history does not dictate our present or our future. And resist the urge to slide into service, because that is what has been historically required of people of the global majority. I don't know if there's something else under that number 5. It looks like it's not showing up well. Yes?
Can I just say that if you're a woman of color, that shows up even more? Because if you're like a woman, you're already expected to like take care of the man and take care of white people. Like it's very hard to feel like you are not supposed to do that, or others don't expect it of you.
Yeah, thank you for saying it. The socialization started at infancy and has continued up until the present time. And the pressure to do it is intense. And resisting that pressure to slide into service takes an enormous amount of energy, thought, intention, intrusion, and courage. Absolutely. And you get to do it. And I'm here to remind you that you can. You can do it. And all of us will be glad that you did it. You'll be pleased, I'll be pleased. I won't be there, but just keep in your mind. Always pleased that you did. All right? Mind your manners. I think, yeah, mind your manners. Oh, I started to change the way this looks. Okay. All right? Mind your manners. White people, you can tell I'm talking from my own experience in all these cases. So this one obviously is a pet peeve of mine. Get the names right. Get the names right. Resist the tendency to feel like it's okay to mispronounce the name because that's just a difficult name to say. Resist the tendency to shorten the name, and resist the tendency to change the name. Oh, can I just call you Susie? No, you cannot just call me Susie. My name is Barbara. Oh, can I just call you Barb? No, I'm not Barb. I had to tell somebody yesterday, no, I'm not Barb. I'm Barbara. That's what that's my name. That's what I prefer being called. It's okay to take the extra breath that it requires to say my name. Go ahead. There's a song. Who knows that song? Say my name. Say my name. Go ahead. Say my name. It's a simple thing. Yeah. Yes.
There's a really important thing about names, and those who will shorten names or give nicknames. It was something that W, as president, tended to do. And the other word for nickname is a diminutive, and that when we use names that are not the names that are given to us to use, we're diminishing the other person.
Exactly. It is one of the earliest, oldest, and for people who don't have this in their minds, it may seem subtle, displays of white supremacy, of white superiority, of establishing dominance, of establishing status. Yes.
As a person of the global majority that struggles with names, is it okay to ask for pronunciation help?
Is it okay to ask?
For help with pronunciation.
Absolutely. So that's in the guide, it should be in the guidelines. Somewhere in the guidelines it should say, ask people how to say their name. And somewhere I have it written, but I'm just going to say it to you. Ask them over and over until you can get it right. And then go home and practice. Sometimes I'll ask people, would you please spell that for me? Because I can get a better image of how it's said if I have the spelling. Figure out what it takes for you to get it right, but do what you need to do to get the name right. Get the names. And don't confuse one person of the global majority with another person of the global majority. No, we don't all look alike. No, we don't. And I like what you said about color blindness. This was a pattern that was installed on white people for a lot of different reasons. But part of the consequence of that pattern is that it made it more difficult for white people to be able to see people of the global majority and to distinguish one from the other. And besides, you couldn't look at them too much anyway because that might be impolite. You're going to have to look. You're going to have to see faces, associate them with names, and you're going to have to practice. Now, resist. Resist the temptation to tell you've met a person of the global majority and you're really excited about having a relationship with that person of the global majority. Resist the temptation to tell them all about your other person of the global majority. Resist the notion that they want to hear all about it, or to ask them about that other person of the global majority that you met once as though they might know them. They might, because the degrees of separation are short, but it's quite likely they might not know every other person. And resist the temptation to tell them about the person of the global majority who was your nanny, that you loved so much, and who did so much for you when you were little. And even though that person is cherished in your heart and dear to you, and it's almost like you're sharing a part of your soul to share your nanny with your newfound friend, resist. So just go ahead and resist that urge. And resist the urge to tell them about the person of the global majority who was your dearest friend in elementary school or kindergarten or whenever it was that you got separated from and you haven't been able to find them anymore. Just resist that. It's a story that's burning in your heart and you want somebody to tell it to you, but resist. Because this isn't going to be the thing that's going to move this relationship forward. Now, people of the global majority, help them get your name right. And don't be upset that they didn't get it right on the first go. White people might not have trained their tongue to say the name Shaquila, or Shaniqua, or
Sunil.
Sunia.
Kair.
Kair.
Tidy.
Say it again.
Tidy.
Again.
Tidy.
Ask. Ask. Because you might not get it right the first time. So ask. And don't be upset with me when I ask you the second time, or the third time, or the fourth time, because I want to get it right. I want to honor your name. don't want to distort it, and I don't want to mess it up. So I will need help, and we will help each other in this project. People of the global majority, avoid the urge to make it easy for white people and allow them to change your name, shorten your name, give you a nickname, or in other words, let go of your name and say something else. Over and over and over again, I see people of the global majority who, in order to avoid the negative consequences of the displeasure of a white person with whom they want to be in a relationship, will say yes. Yeah, it's okay. Oh, I don't mind. Oh, yeah, go ahead. No, don't. It's not okay. Don't go ahead. Support and help them and insist they get the things right. And people of the global majority, interrupt white people who mistake you for another person. Don't get mad, don't get upset, just correct them. It's okay. They want to tell you about their other PGM friends, just tell them, I might someday want to hear about that, but not right now. Or, oh, and here's one more thing. Oftentimes, a white person will have met someone from a culture not their own, the person of the global majority, or they might have visited a place and then they have become the expert. And they want to tell you all about it. You say, I'm from Japan, or I'm from Jamaica, or I'm from Nigeria, and they want to tell you all about Nigeria. Just tell them, you know what? You could hold them for right now. Interrupt them. Don't let them be the expert on you and your people and your culture. Just let them know that that's not going to be helpful right now. Okay. B, yes.
Just to share my own experience, I work with a lot of people of global majority, 2nd through 6th graders, and the names and the spellings are new to me in a lot of cases. So I have finally let myself let go of the idea that I should always have it right. And so as soon as I meet the new student, I repeat their name back to them and ask them to help me if I say their name wrong, to please remind me how I should say it. And that seemed to work pretty well.
Excellent. Thank you. So, in that vein, be prepared to make mistakes. We are learning how to do this. Oh God, every time I want to say his name, what's his name? What are you talking about? From the center in Kentucky, in Tennessee, from the Highlander Center. From the Highlanders, who started the Highlander Center? Come on, you have to know that. Okay, when we meet next time, know who started the Highlander Center. So when I forget who it is, you can tell me. He says we make this road by walking. We don't do it because we already know how to do it. We learn how to do it by doing it. And that's what you're going to do. So be prepared to make mistakes in this project of making relationships with people across race and culture. Now here's the deal, and if you haven't made any mistakes lately, that means what? You're not trying. So if you're gonna do something, you're gonna have to make mistakes. Now the deal about making mistakes is this: you don't just make a mistake and then walk away. You make a mistake, you clean it up. You acknowledge, I made a mistake. You apologize. You say, I'm sorry. You find out, you learn what you need to know so that you can understand what the mistake was. Often, white people can make a mistake and they'll get a clue that something is off, that a mistake was made, but they have no idea. Well, was it something I said? Or was it something I did? Or was my input? Ask. Find out what the mistake was so that you can understand it. Understand what the mistake was. And then find out what damage resulted from that mistake. And then ask what needs to be done to repair the damage. Can you hear me back there? Do I need to use this? It would be better? Okay, so just remind me when I'm not. So just remind me to use this. So make a mistake, acknowledge that a mistake was made, understand what the mistake was, ask what was the damage, ask what needs to be done to repair the damage, and then clean it up. Clean up the damage made from the mistake. Many times white people will want to explain it away. Don't. That compounds the damage. Intentions are not the issue. Consequences of language and behavior are the issue. So resist the urge to explain it away, resist the urge to say that's not what I intended, resist the urge to downplay the significance of the mistake, and by all means resist the urge to say that's not what happened. You follow what I mean by that? Okay. Resist that tendency by all means. So if you're feeling the tension, or if the person of the global majority says ouch, in whatever way they might say ouch, then take the time to attend to this process. And if you're a person of the global majority, interrupt mistakes. As people of the global majority, we have been, for our own survival, for our well-being, we have been required to go along with a lot of inappropriate, incorrect, or negative and damaging behavior directed toward us or directed toward our people by white people. That doesn't mean that you have to go along with negative, bad behavior or mistakes that are made in your direction. You get to interrupt the mistake. You get to say no. You get to say stop. And you get to say what the mistake is or was that has been made. And you get to say what is the damage. And you get to say what needs to be done to repair the damage that was made by the mistake. So if somebody starts explaining or rationalizing, you get to say, hold that, not useful right now. And you get to give instructions on how to repair the mistake. Now, this one is a critical point that I want you to keep in your head because of a quite natural tendency to assume that if somebody made a mistake and you tell them what the mistake is and you tell them what the damage is that has been caused as a result of the mistake, that they ought to know how to clean it up. Surely common sense will tell them how to clean it up. Well, I am so sorry to tell you, no, common sense is not going to tell them how to clean it up. You have to tell them how to clean it up. So you have to practice telling white people what to do. For many people of the global majority, this will be a big challenge because it is not in our history or in our experience to tell white people what to do. So you're going to have to get in the mirror and practice. You're going to have to practice telling them what to do to repair the damage and to clean it up. Yes?
What if those of us with privilege aren't able to repair the mistake to the more oppressed person's satisfaction?
You're going to have to keep trying. Now, I like the way you added the term to that person's satisfaction because part of what that makes space for is the reality that for some people of the global majority, the history of bad behavior or damaging behavior toward them from white people is so long that nothing they do is going to be to their satisfaction. So that's a possibility. That is a reality. And that's going to get in the way of the ongoing relationship. And as long as you are trying to make this particular relationship work, the thing that I can recommend is to say to the person, the apology, I'm sorry. I want to make it right. I will keep trying to make it right. I hope you will continue to talk with me about this until we figure it out, and assume that it might take a lifetime. And I encourage you to work from the assumption that at some point it can, while I'm acknowledging that it might not. Is that?
Thank you.
Yeah. Other thoughts or questions about this business of making mistakes? Yes.
Would you be so kind as to give us an example of what this might look like?
Oh, yes, I would love to if I could think of one right quick. Give me an example of a mistake that you have made.
That's what I'm saying. It's like, my mistake is probably not engaging with people of the global majority.
For
just
fear.
Feeling awkward, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Tell me about a person of the global majority that you can recall that you wanted to have a conversation with or a relationship with.
Okay, so I fish out on the Yukon River, and I fish out on the Yukon River, and it's almost entirely Native Alaskans out there, and so there's, you know, people are very friendly, but sometimes I don't know how to engage in a conversation. I always want to, because I find those people are really, really wonderful, you know, people to get to know once I get to know them. But there's always this awkwardness, you know. And some of that I know is just that I didn't grow up there. You know, it's a small village. It's got 500 people in it, and they don't know me from when they were in kindergarten or whatever.
Okay, thank you. Excellent. George. Who else has felt awkward about initiating a relationship with a person from a different? Mm-hmm. Okay. So you're not alone. That's for whatever comfort that provides for you. Let me say that is, the word that I want is completely understandable. I would say to be expected, and the reason I would say to be expected, but I'm going to say that's to be expected, and then I want to take it back, right? I'm going to say to be expected because it is a result of the socialization and conditioning to which we have been subjected. And I'm taking it back because when you were little, you had absolutely no hesitation at all about talking to anybody. In fact, your people had to grab you and hold you back. They had to sit you down. They had to say no. And so I'm going to give you two kinds of answers. One answer has to do with what to do, and the other answer has to do with some preparation you're going to have to make. Now, let me start with the preparation you're going to have to make. And I'm going to start by telling a couple of stories. Do I have time to tell a couple of stories? Yep. Okay, who said yep? When my daughter was 11 months old, I recall being in the airport around holiday time, and many families were in the airport traveling with small people. And what I noticed, I just remember sitting back and watching, just watching. What I noticed was that little people, independent of race, culture, color, language, they would rush up to each other, they would touch each other, they would hold on to each other, and they would talk to each other. Now, none of them understood the other's language because I didn't understand their language either. In other words, they were talking in young people's language, all right? But they had no trouble at all interacting with each other, being friends with each other, slobbering on each other. No trouble whatsoever. Now, what I did notice was that until a parent would say, "Get over here and sit down," snatch their child, make them sit right here, be quiet. But until you got that message that it was not okay, you didn't have any trouble doing it. So you're going to have to do some of the work to get that back. It's not gone away, it's just tucked away. All of us have it, but it's tucked away. I can recall going into doctor's offices, and little children are playing in the floor. And when my child started to play, what happens? Get over here and sit down. So they learned, well, playing might be okay, but not with them. So you got that message. You're going to have to go back and ferret out those messages that told you that it was not okay to play or interact with those particular people. So there are these messages you're going to have to grieve. You're going to have to cry about it. You're going to have to go back to that place where your natural exuberance and joy at being connected with another human being got squashed. And especially your exuberance and joy about being connected with people who were different from yourself got squashed. Young people are so interested in each other, and difference is just something to be excited about, something to be explored. That's what difference is to young people. And the adults around us installed their fear on top of our exuberance, on top of our natural inquisitiveness. And we're going to have to go back and take a look at how that happened to us, uncover it, get that debris out of the way so that we can recover our natural ability to be in relationship with many kinds of people, with every human. So that's part 2. Part 1, in the present time, you're just going to have to practice walking up to somebody. Can we do this again? And saying, hello, I'm Barbara Love. Hello, I'm whoever. Might we talk? Now, I was in, this is an old story. I was in Nairobi for the women's conference. And I remember this because this was one of my mistakes. For the women's conference in 1985. And there were 17,000 women from all over the world at this conference. It was, you can imagine how excited I was. I was just excited beyond myself. And I decided that in addition to the presentations that I was going to give, one of the things that I wanted to do was to meet as many people as I could. And so I had to school myself. Now, I'm just a little black girl from the backwoods of Arkansas, right? Anybody know Arkansas? Yeah. So the rest of you don't even know where Arkansas is, right? Right? You know, I'm just backwoods of Arkansas. So who am I? Who am I to walk up and introduce myself to somebody from name a place, and they were there. But I just decided this is what I am going to do. And so I did. I would just walk up to people and say, hello, my name is, and sometimes, and invariably, they would put out their hand, they would shake my hand. Sometimes they understood English because I was English only. I didn't have another language. Sometimes they could speak to me and sometimes they couldn't. And when they couldn't, we just smile at each other and then let go and walk away. So I was just having a wonderful time. And then one day, I was in a restaurant, and I saw these 3 women. They looked to be African women, sitting at a table. And I thought, oh, ooh. I was just so excited. So I walked right over. I said, hello, my name is Barbara Love. May I join you? And they looked right at me and said, no. Oh, my God. Talk about an awful feeling. What cultural faux pas did I just commit? You know, what wrong thing did I just say? What did I do? So I said, I'm so sorry, and I went back to my table. Well, to tell you the end of this story, shortly, one of them came over to my table and they said, what were we thinking? By all means, come and join us. So I said, no. That's all right. And they said, no, come. I said, no, it's okay. So I made them beg. You gonna get me back that easy? But I did. I went to their table, and they We had a wonderful conversation, a wonderful dinner. They invited me to come to their home. They invited me to go to their native village. I got a chance to be part of a ceremony that no tourists ever got a chance to be a part of. It was just a wonderful end to the story. But the point is, on the face of it, I made a mistake. On the face of it, I did the wrong thing. And part of what I'm saying is you just prepare yourself to do it. Take the knee. Take the knee. You know, that man has a chance that the president's going to find out who he was. You know what I'm saying? Given the tendencies of the current occupant of the White House. It's quite likely that he'll have somebody find out who he is and make life difficult for him. You know what I'm saying? And that man knew that before he took the knee. So that's not going to happen to you if you put out your hand to some of those people on the river and say, tell me what you're fishing with. You know, I don't know what baits or trout, or minnows, or I don't know what the right language is. You'll think of it. But just take the chance. And one of the things that I tell people often is you don't need to know in advance what you're going to say. Open up your mouth and let words come out. Open your mouth and let words come out. And I've had people come back and tell me, thank you, Barbara, for telling me this. Because I tell them about situations like this. But they say, you know, at my workplace, I tried this. I tried this out. And I open up my mouth, and sure enough, words come out. And they turn out to be the right words. They turn out to be just right. So put out your hand, open your mouth, and see. Oh, here's the other thing people say to me. So sometimes I'm waiting to see what words are going to come out, because I have no idea what words are going to come out of my mouth. But they do, the words come out. So you can do this. Open your mouth and let the words come out. Anything else about making mistakes? Yes.
Not mistakes, but I always chat up people at the bus stop, and I always talk about the weather, because Natalie's really into climate change. I always
Yes.
What weather we're having.
There you go.
That's great.
Don't, however, talk about religion. So, yeah. Okay. Invisibility. Now, let me just double check how we're doing on time. 28, 4. Yeah, we're good. Invisibility. I'm going to start with people of the global majority. My instructions for you are to interrupt the habit of going invisible. For our safety, for our well-being, to avoid negative consequences, to avoid negative actions coming toward us, we have practiced and perfected the art of going invisible, of being not noticed, not heard. I call it turning sideways and going invisible. We're going to have to give that up. Going to have to do the emotional work that's needed to sharpen your courage to be able to stand visibly in relationships, in projects, in the work. That means putting yourself at the front. That means never occupying the back seat of a room again, never going to the margins again. Front and center. That's going to be I know it's a challenge for many of us, because front and center often feels like danger, because in the past it was dangerous. But you have to challenge that pattern, that feeling, that tendency in yourself, and move to the front and center. Remember that you have ideas, and that your ideas are valid, your ideas are good, and be prepared to share your ideas. Oh, there we go. Open your mouth and let the words come out. And you're going to have to interrupt the behavior of others who behave as though you are not present. You're going to have to interrupt the behavior of people who walk right over you, because white people do. And what they say is, oh, I didn't see you. That happens all the time. And you're going to have to say, but I'm here. Notice that I'm here. You're going to have to interrupt white people. You're talking to someone, and a white person walks up and just starts talking to that person as though you're not standing there. You're going to have to interrupt that. And you say, but I was talking to this person, and they say, oh, I didn't see you. It happens all the time. You're going to have to say, yep, I'm here. Notice. You're going to have to interrupt it when white people repeat your ideas as though they are their own. You say something, and nobody says a word. And then a white person says exactly what you said, and people say, oh, that's a great idea. And I said to someone once, this man did this the third time in a meeting, and I looked at him and I said, would you stop repeating what I have said and claiming my ideas as your own? And he said, I never did that. I said, you just did. And he couldn't remember that it had happened. But that was the third instance in that one meeting where this had happened. White people don't notice when it happens, and they won't learn to notice until people of the global majority help them learn to notice. I'm sorry that you have that work to do. And you have that work to do. Because your presence, your visible presence, is essential to the success of this movement.
Yeah, I have a question. You're just describing also gender relationships.
Absolutely.
That's the male relationship with the female. So what you're saying is the white relationship to African American, to the people of the global majority, may be the same as the male relationship to everybody else. But are you seeing a difference between the white male and the white female in actions toward the global majority?
Yes. To say it another way is that I'm describing relationships of domination and subordination. And absolutely, this happens on gender, and it happens on other, actually religion and ability and language and so on. And yes, what happens with white females is that whiteness inserts itself, and patterns of white superiority impact relationships between white females and people of the global majority, so that they end up acting out those same things that had been done to them on the basis of gender.
What about white female, black male?
Yep, that happens. In other words, the patterns of domination and subordination recreate themselves in relationships between white females and black males. And those patterns of black males, black females, other people of the global majority, sliding into the patterns of subordinated relationships shows itself. Yes?
And white males get dominated as children and by other white males in superior positions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Adultism, or the oppression of young people by adults, the same sets of dominant subordinate relationships show up. And part of what we understand is that if that had not happened to us as young people, we wouldn't so easily slide into a repetition of those patterns as adults. But the fact that it happened to all of us, being placed in positions of subordination as young people, makes it so much easier for us to take on those roles as dominant or subordinate as adults. Yes?
How do you make peace between two political parties?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. Because I can't say what I'm thinking.
We're all thinking it.
Yeah. No. Yeah. If two political parties were moving toward the same goals, that would be one thing. But in the present climate, I do not have the impression that that is the case. So what is going to be required? What is going to be required is for more of us, to get more of us to share our voices with all of the parties, to let them know what is acceptable to us and what is not. Because the fact that things are moving in the direction that they are moving occurs because not enough of us have made it clear that it is not acceptable. So part of our job is to get more people expressing their viewpoints about what is acceptable from either political party. Did I see someone's hand? Yeah, okay. A couple more, and then I want you to interrupt racism. White people, don't be surprised by racism. You've had, however old you are, you've had that many years of living in a society where it pervades all our institutions. It invades, it is infused in our way of life. It is infused in our way of thinking. It is infused in our language. It is there. So your goal is to increase your capacity to notice it, to name it, to interrupt it, to do something about it. Not just interrupt it, but to do something about it. Help people understand what is going on, help them understand why it is racism, help them understand why it is not acceptable. And when you see other white people engaged in racism, first of all, I said interrupt racism from other white people, interrupt it for yourself, and increase your capacity to interrupt it with other white people. Don't just step away and assume, okay, I'm the good white person and that person did that. But assume that you have a connection, a relationship, and a responsibility to this white person to help them also understand what racism is and how to interrupt it, and support that white person to repair the mistake. And people of the global majority, remember, white people are good. Racism happened to everybody in this society. It got installed on white people. They're acting out the installation of patterns that have been installed on them. And in many cases, white people don't know that what they did, the language that they used, is experienced as racist. Most of the white people that I know wouldn't do it if they knew. They don't get up in the morning and say, let me go out here and see how I can behave in a racist way. That's not what happens. It happens as a result of the installation of the patterns quite beyond their awareness and certainly beyond their intentions. So, if a white person is doing something that you experience as racist, and you don't tell them about it or explain to them how or why you experience it as racism, what is the likelihood that they will do it again? Do you see what I'm saying? So give them the information so that they can figure out whether to do it or not. Now, if they do it again after you've told them you experience this as racism, you're in a different ballpark. But on the one hand, assume that it's information that they need, and you can tell them. Assume that patterns of racism are a part of everyday society, and you get to do the same thing. Interrupt it, tell them what it is, explain the nature of the racism, and tell them what needs to be different. Tell them what needs to change. Together, working with people with whom you want to be in relationship.
Question?
Yes. Yes.
So I've experienced this pattern and not been able to get beyond step 3 because the person who's exhibited the racist behavior absolutely refuses to see the racist behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have advice for that scenario?
Yeah. My advice is about helping that white person examine their motivations and their goals. If their goal is to be right, then we're at a dead end. But if their goal is to develop relationships with people of the global majority, do something effective about climate change, have an influence with Congress, etc., then you can invite them to notice that these goals can't be accomplished if you can't get past this. And they get to decide whether being right is more important than accomplishing these other goals. It often, and I see, whose hand I see? 1, 2, 3. So I'm coming to you, but let me share one more thought. It often is useful if you can practice helping white people notice racism in a way that does not impute blame and shame. When white people feel blamed or shamed or cornered, it's hard for them to move. It's hard for them to acknowledge, and it's hard for them to change. When your conversation with them acknowledges their humanness, which means acknowledging their goodness as humans, and acknowledges that the particular behavior doesn't make them bad, it simply makes them act out historical patterns of racism, which is not their fault, and they didn't create it, and it isn't personally theirs, it was handed to them by society, and you're offering them an opportunity to know something, to grow something, and to move something, to change something. My experience is that context has a better chance of being effective and moving beyond 3 than if they feel blamed, or if they feel bad about it, or if they feel ashamed as a result of having it brought to their attention. Okay? Yes?
How do you start that conversation with someone who's ignorant about racism? And one of the thoughts I have is, like, for example, in my family, some of my family members are ignorant and towards people who are less privileged. And they have that experience, they have that from their lived experiences with people of the global majority.
Say it again.
So how do we start that conversation and develop that conversation with people who are ignorant about racism and oppression?
Well, taking into account what I've just said, acknowledging that whatever these attitudes are that you are describing as racism, helping them to understand that they didn't create those attitudes, that they are part of a package that has been handed to them. And if you can figure out ways to help them understand how that package got handed to them, and if you can help them to understand the ways in which internalized racism, that is, the ways in which racism operates between and among differing groups of people of the global majority, helps to maintain and reinforce white superiority, that might open a window or a door for them to be able to understand this particular piece. That having people, different groups of people of the global majority at odds with each other makes space for and doesn't allow them the window to challenge and interrupt white supremacy. And as long as white supremacy reigns, then all people of the global majority are at some disadvantage. So helping them to see how these attitudes have been installed on them in the interest of white supremacy. It's one thought. Yes?
I was just wondering if you feel that if someone who's done something racist or prejudiced and you confront them about it and they don't see it, if you never come to a disagreement, do you feel that it's kind of like okay or like a good use of your time and energy to continue to cultivate a relationship with them in hopes that maybe eventually they'll see it, knowing that it's possible that they may never agree with you with that. That might have to be the end of it. But do you feel that it is okay to do that, especially coming from PGM, it's almost like, well, this isn't my job to really do this, but I feel that if I continue to talk to this person, maybe.
Hold on. You have to say all that again. That's the answer.
I was just wondering if you feel that it's okay or a good use of your energy to approach someone who has done something racist or prejudiced and to try to continue to cultivate a relationship with them even after you've confronted them about it and they say that they disagree with you or they just don't see how you're right, or if, especially coming from a PGM, that is, since it's like not your job, is that a waste of your time and energy because we're not here to educate white people on what's right or wrong, but is it still a good use of your energy knowing that in the end there you may never come to a good conclusion?
Okay. Did you get all that? And the answer is yes. All of what you said is absolutely correct. And you have to make a determination in every instance which course of action you will pursue. And let me repeat some of what you have said in this way. One, we agree that it is not the job of people of the global majority to educate white people about racism. So on that we are agreed. Number two, I am also of the opinion that white people who really want to learn about racism will eventually get it, because they'll keep working until they get it. Number three, white people who want to learn something about racism and who want to be in relationships with people of the global majority will get it much faster if there is a person of the global majority who is willing to give them some information about racism, language, behavior, etc., and who's also willing to tell them not only what is wrong, but what would be a better or less racist language or behavior. So even though it isn't your job, it is sometimes in your best interest to do so. And you have to assess every situation to determine whether or not it is, in your best estimation, a good use of your time and energy to try to educate this particular white person. Several scenarios are running through my mind, so I'll try to share one or two. If there is a white person where your relationship, I was going to say is inevitable. I don't mean it is inevitable. I mean, let's say it's in a work situation. Let's say it's your supervisor. It's in your best interest to keep trying to educate that person if you're going to stay in that position. But if it's a random person you met in the grocery store parking lot, then you might make a different assessment. If it's your supervisor, or if it's your person in your CCL local chapter, and you're trying to figure some things out, again, you get to make an assessment. They might not understand this particular situation, but they might be able to understand some others. And you'll decide whether it is in your best interest to invest your time and energy in continuing to have dialogue with them, because you understand that the likelihood that they will understand these other issues is large enough that it's worth your while to do it, and important enough for you to keep putting your energy into it, even though they might not understand this particular scenario. Does that? Yeah. So you're always making a decision about the use of your time and your energy. And occasionally, there's going to be a white person that you say, I'm going to have a relationship with this person by damn. And they might not understand it today, but before I'm finished, they're going to understand this. And I'm not giving up on you. You are mine. So you just decide. Yes. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. You were three.
So I have a question I feel a little vulnerable asking in the context of this discussion. And it's something that I haven't heard come up at all, and it's a sort of simple thing, is what about friendship? I mean, just simple friendship.
Yeah. I think that's what George kind of talked about, being on the river.
Microphone.
Oh, thank you. I think that's what George kind of talked about, being on the river fishing. I've talked about these in the context of developing relationships so that you can get the work done. And some of these relationships will remain work relationships. Most of these, if you don't develop a friendship, the work relationship is not going to last. That's why the long-term commitment is necessary, because being committed to each other over the long haul is on the basis of a friendship, a caring about each other, not just a recognition that there is work that needs to be done. So yes, absolutely, friendship fits into this. And some of these relationships we will work at and maintain just because we want to get a job done, but most of it will occur within the context of a committed relationship, friendship with each other. Was that your question?
Yeah, I mean, it's just, friendship in some ways is just a much simpler thing.
Sometimes.
Sometimes.
Sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah. In terms of this interrupting racism from other white people, I feel like there's a need for doing it in a way. I feel like if it's done in a certain way, it runs the risk of almost kind of rescuing the person of the global majority, or falling into what you're talking about before, of taking charge and saving them. And I've found this with trying to interrupt sexism as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of just, I think, if you had any guidelines.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like I have some sense that it's about kind of recognizing the agency of the person of the global majority or the woman involved, but it's hard. So there's any simple rules.
Well, thank you for pointing this out. This is a very critical and important piece to keep in mind. Absolutely. And interrupting racism where there are not people of the global majority involved, then obviously it's straightforwardly on you. When it's in the context of a relationship with a person of the global majority, then thinking about what is the most appropriate thing to do so that it doesn't repeat patterns of domination and subordination, doesn't reinstall patterns of white supremacy, so that it supports and reinforces the agency of the person of the global majority, and so that it ensures that the racism does not go unacknowledged, uninterrupted, so that something for sure is done about it, will require paying close and diligent attention on your part. Now, guidelines, any guideline I give you, take it as truth. And number two, you're free to completely disregard it. Okay, so, because I was going to say, I'm always up for checking in with the person of the global majority, having conversations with the person of the global majority about what's happening in this situation. Sometimes a person of the global majority is all ready to handle it. You just need a little space. They might need to look around and find the face of a white person who looks like they understand and know what's going on. They need to look around and make sure that there's somebody who's going to be on their side and have their back while they handle this. Sometimes that's the case. And sometimes it is the case that the person of the global majority is overwhelmed by it and they need support. So you're going to be working real hard to figure out what's the situation in this scenario and doing your best to figure it out. And when you can't figure it out, ask. You can say to the person of the global majority, can I ask you a question about what just happened? Or do you have some thoughts about what just happened? Or would you like to say something about what just happened? You can even say, would you like me to say something about what just happened? But, you know, like put a little digit, a check in there so that it's noted and not just passed over. Sometimes a person of the global majority just needs a few minutes to collect their thinking, and they're going to come back to it and handle it. And they might say so, but make a pause in the conversation so that it's noted and the person can give an indication of whether they're ready to handle it, whether they want support from you to handle it, whether we want to just put this on the table and come back and handle it later, and so on. That's what I can think of. Thank you. Yes.
Hi, I was wondering, over this past school year, I've heard of a lot of these different conversations about this theory that racism against white people doesn't exist. And I was just wondering if you have any insights about that particular theory.
Racism against white people. To answer that question, we have to go to some basic definitions. All right? So here's how I define racism. Number one, I talk about racism as simply the implementation of policies of white supremacy. Racism is the implementation of policies of white supremacy, is the enactment of white supremacy. Racism is the ideology that racism is the ideology that humans can be divided into groups called races. That's a myth. But nevertheless, though it is not a biological or anthropological reality, it is a sociological, historical phenomenon that results in the allocation of access to resources and opportunities for participation in society on the basis of presumed membership in racial groups, where some groups are considered superior to others. In U.S. society, white people, from the very beginning of the country to the present time, have been deemed superior and have been, by law and by practice, allocated superior access to participation in society. So the reality in U.S. society, by law and by practice, is that white people have been allocated a superior position, period. People of the global majority might act in hurtful ways toward white people. That is entirely possible. They might act in discriminatory ways toward a person of color. That is entirely possible. Given the definition of racism that I just gave you, that excludes the possibility that people of the global majority might act in racist ways toward white people, because we're talking about prejudice plus power. Now, let me add, one of the prevailing issues in contemporary society is that white people have been socialized and trained in an ideology that suggests that they are entitled to everything. And when they are denied access to everything, then they assume that somehow they have been discriminated against. So, what was it? I'm going to get the Dick Cohen, a columnist for the Washington Post, published an article just a week or so ago, describing how, in this case he was talking about gender, but the same issue applies, that he was, okay, that one was about gender, so it won't make it as clear. I don't want to muddy muddy the water. Okay, so this woman at a workshop I did a couple of weeks ago said, members of the Lenape tribe were having a meeting, and she, as a white woman, had racism practiced against her because she was denied the opportunity to go to their meeting. She was excluded from the meeting. Or white people at my university, somebody said they didn't get admitted, so they had racism because some people of the global majority got admitted because they. So that is based on the assumption that they were, I said to the woman, first of all, your assumption that you were discriminated against or that racism was practiced, she called it reverse racism. And I say reverse racism, well, why can't you just have ordinary racism? Why do you have to have special racism? But the point is, it's based on an assumption that you're entitled. And if you don't get everything, like these Lenape people are having a meeting about Lenape things, and you assume that you're entitled to go because you want to go. Why are you entitled to go to their meeting? And why is it racism if they say we're having a meeting of the Lenape people and it's just for Lenape people? Why is that racism against you? And white people assume that it's racism because they're not getting a chance to get something that they want. Because white supremacy has given white people the notion that whatever you want, you can have it. And now I'm off your question. I'm going to stop myself in a minute. But the prevailing ideology in the country right now is all about the notion that white people are not getting something that they want, and that's why they're acting so badly. That they're shooting people in schools because, and they're, just this whole ideology in the country right now is that white people were promised. They were promised everything, and they're not getting it. Their jobs are down, their jobs have disappeared. All these things are happening, and they're white. How could that possibly be happening? So to sum up the answer to your question, there is that belief, and it is a false belief, growing out of, being produced by the ideology of white supremacy. Okay. One more. Oh, that was guideline number 8. We're almost at the end of the guidelines. One more, and then there's something I'd like you to do. Be odd and take the knee. Take the knee. Do what you have to do to scrunch up your courage and take the knee. Sometimes it will be easy and sometimes not. Sometimes you want to get somebody to do it with you. Going it alone isn't always the best policy, but if you have to go it alone, be prepared to do so. And be prepared to be considered odd. You know, this museum they just opened, no, I'm not going to tell you that story. No, I'm not going to tell you that story. Okay, I'm going to tell you that story. Like, right. Right, exactly. Well, you'll see why I wasn't going to tell you this story. You know, they just opened up a museum in Alabama, the lynching museum. If you go there, you'll see that there are white people in there too. They lynched white people who dared to stand up, white people who dared to speak out, white people who dared to interrupt racism, to challenge racism. So that's why I wasn't going to tell you that story. Lynching, the lynching museum in Montgomery. Yep. So that's not the best way to encourage you. That's not how I wanted to end this conversation, talking about lynching. But I'm just going to say, take the knee. Be prepared to take the knee.
But we do have that fear.
Yes.
Of what we'll get from other white people when we speak up.
Absolutely. And you're going to have to face that fear. You're going to have to acknowledge that fear. Thank you for saying that. You're going to have to acknowledge that fear. You're going to have to, and there's some certain emotional work you're going to have to do because the fear got installed early. So there's certain emotional work that you're going to have to do to face the fear. It's part of the emotional baggage that we all carry, but we can heal that emotional baggage so that the fear doesn't deter us, so that the fear doesn't stop us, so that the fear doesn't get in the way of our being able to speak up, step out, or kneel down when the time comes, when it is appropriate to do so. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to get a partner, and this time I will ask people of the global majority to pair up with other people of the global majority for this exercise. So in order to do that, I'm going to ask you to wave your hand and identify as a person of the global majority if you would like to be paired with another person of the global majority for this next exercise. So wave your hand and look around and catch the hand of another person of the global majority, and that will be your partner. So get a partner. Okay? All right. Now, everybody else get a partner. Yes? Okay. So here's what you're going to do. Here's what you're going to do. I want you to think about, well, actually, I'm just going to change. I'm going to change what we're going to do, given this last piece that we just talked about. Yeah. And if we have time, we'll do what I originally planned. But right now, what I want you to do is to think about what fears come up for you when you think about making relationships with people across race and culture, when you think about interrupting racism, when you think about somebody possibly telling you that something you said or did was experienced as racist. What are the fears that come up for you, and where did those fears come from? So you'll have 3 minutes to talk out loud about early fears about race, racism, relationships. Question about what I'm asking you to do?
Who's A, who's B?
I'll tell you in a moment. Just, yes.
This is 3 minutes with both of us talking, or each of us talking?
You're going to take turns. So right now, decide who is A and who is B. A's, raise your hand. A's. All right, B's, raise your hand. B's, raise your hand. Okay, and you'll figure it out, but I'm going to say, now remember the guidelines. When it's your turn to be the speaker, you're going to talk about fears that come up for you when you think about making relationships across race and culture, when you think about interrupting racism, or when you think about having racism, language, or behavior that you might display interrupted by someone else. When you are the listener, remember that your job is very, very important. You are to what? Look really interested in what your partner is saying. And did I say the part about looking pleased and delighted? Interested, pleased and delighted, hanging on to their every word. And if you're looking at your watch, that's not going to do it. Or if you're looking at the door, the ceiling, all right? So, there you go. Excellent. There's your partner. Any other question about what we're doing? So you got 3 minutes. Let's start with A. A, you're the speaker. B, you're the listener. You may begin.
And then she went on and got into the police stuff and she said, just all these people who were shot or brutalized, it was only because they weren't following the business structure. No problem. So I didn't bother responding because I felt there's no way
Okay, that's time. That's time. Find the end of your sentence. Yeah. Okay. Find the end of your sentence. Okay, switch. Okay. That's time.
It's hard when it's in your say something.
Okay. What I want you to know, and I won't ask you to talk about that experience, but what I want you to know is the following. Fear, we all have it, amongst humans is natural. Because how else were we going to get away from the saber-toothed tiger? People who didn't respond to a healthy dose of fear sometimes were had for supper. Right? Fear towards humans is not. Fear of humans toward other humans is learned. Now, historically, there might have been good reasons to learn it. Protection of the territory, whatever. But it is learned. It is installed on us after we are born. So, I say that to say, in the present time, the fact that we feel fear about these relationships or about interrupting racism and so on is a learned response, and anything that is learned and it might not be so much as unlearning it, but it might be healing from the fear that got installed on us. There might be many, many ways to go about that healing process. This exercise that you just did, where we get a chance to talk about it and be listened to with care and attention, is one good way to approach the healing of the hurt, the fear that got installed on us. And you can do this with other people with whom you elect, choose, agree to engage in that kind of relationship. There are other ways to do it, and this is one. The second thing, how many things was that? Okay, all right. So another thing that I will say is that I think that the thing that keeps most people quiet and still is fear. So it is in our best interest, if we want to accomplish the goals that you set for yourselves, is to do that work, to do the work on healing from fear and supporting other people to do so. I think that's what I wanted to say about fear. Now, there's questions about that. One, two.
I remember reading a book, actually it was Dune, many, many years ago, and there was a saying in it that got repeated often that I've never forgotten, which fear is the mind killer.
I completely agree. Well, with this exception, I won't say it's the mind killer, I will say it's the mind coverer. That's how I would say it different. So our mind is still there, but it's covered up, and we don't have access to it, which can feel like it's dead. Yes?
I guess I want to say sometimes when I have feelings about and frustration when dealing with people who are less privileged, I go and have those feelings with other privileged people.
Yes.
I don't express any frustration. I try to just be accepting when I'm talking to others, but I go and have those conversations. So I let those feelings, I let myself have those feelings.
But with other people with privilege. That is a very important piece. So when you're looking to do this work, be thoughtful about who are the people that you are doing this work with, and paying attention to issues of domination, subordination, power, and privilege in selecting the people with whom you're going to do this work. The next thing that I wanted you to do is the following. I want you to think about what you want to do next. What is your next step? And I'm going to propose a next step. I mean, obviously you get to figure out what you want to do, but I'm going to propose that you get yourselves, well, this is in conjunction with what you want to do, specifically in terms of developing relationships. And I'm going to propose that you get you a partnership for accountability. So you think of 2 or 3 people, and they might be people in your local community or organization, but it occurs to me, given the way Zoom and Skype and WhatsApp, you probably know some others that I don't know, work, it could be people anywhere. It could be people in this room. But you think of 2 or 3 other people who will be part of an accountability circle for you to continue to do your thinking about your next steps, and maybe even engage in some of the healing work that will support your continuing to take these steps. And so you will meet occasionally. You decide how often you want to meet, and take turns talking about what you did, how it went, how it felt to do it, the challenges that you faced in doing it, the mistakes that you made, how you repaired those mistakes, successes, and what you want to do next. Always have a next step. So I'm going to have you do a little bit of planning right now. So to do that planning, I'm going to get you to get up, walk around, and find 2 other people to sit and talk with about your accountability circle. And each of you gets to take a turn about talking about how you would set up your accountability circle. Question about what I'm asking you to do. Okay, so you have to get up, walk around, find 2 other people to sit with.
Is there a place where the music stops?
I'm sorry?
Does the music stop?
Yes, I will let you know when your time is up. Find 2 more people, and let's get somebody up here. Good to see you. All right. So take 5 minutes. Well, okay, let's do it this way. Take 2 minutes each in your circle to talk about how you want to set up your accountability circle.
Are you going to tell us when to switch?
Yes, I can do that. Okay, so we'll give you 2 minutes each. And the first person decide who's first, and you can go ahead and start. How would you set up your accountability circle? Could you all move that way? Trying to look at the screen. Yes. So the first person, you're on. Yeah. Okay, one should finish up and switch to two. One is finishing, switch to two. I think that's time. Huh? Huh? Okay, one more minute. One more minute. Oh no, it's time to switch to the third person. Yeah, third person. It's time for the third person. Time for the third person.
Creating
Okay, that's about time. That's about time. Okay. All right. I would like.
You started.
They'll give them it's okay. So I want some people to share with the rest of us your next steps or how you plan to move forward from here or how you plan to set up your circle. Because we inspire each other. And sometimes I get ideas from listening to what somebody else is going to do. I get some ideas about things I might do. So this is not a pressure for you to share anything, but everybody's going to share. No. I'd like, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 8 people who would share your next steps or how you plan to go about doing it. And for whatever inspiration it would be for others. So there's 1. Who else will share? 2. Remember your number. Anyone else? 3, 4, 5. Oops, I saw your hand reaching back. That makes you 6. Makes you 6. Okay. I did not see any hands of white men. So I'm holding. Oh, yeah, I saw 1. I got 1. I saw 1. I'm going to get 2 more. 2 more. 2 more. 2 more.
Two more white men over there?
Which numbers is 8, 8, 9?
Okay.
All right. 1. Who was 1?
Hi, my name is Zahara. I'm from New Jersey. I was talking with my two partners, Debbie and Bruce, and I was telling them about an experience that I had where I was made to feel that just because of the way I looked, that I didn't belong in the space that I am. And before that, I didn't have that problem, but afterwards I was paranoid about how the way I was perceived, and if people would just look at me and not understand why I'm in certain situations. And one of the ways that translated into my life was whenever in school a teacher would come up to me and be like, "Oh, Sahara, that's a great paper," or "That was some great work you did." I always be like, "Oh, that's not a big deal," or it's not that, it wasn't that good. And I realized that it had such a negative effect on me because it was giving me that negative feedback loop and it was me telling myself that I didn't belong in this space more than other people telling me that I didn't belong in this space. And it also kind of translates into my life as an immigrant child. My parents are from the West Indies, and you were always taught, be humble, that's okay what you did, but you can do better. And I just learned, I'm talking to my little sister who's here, and there's also this boy who I'm friends with in school he's a faculty. Oh, okay. And this boy, and I'm gonna hold myself accountable by choosing the middle ground and being when someone compliments me, just saying thank you and leaving it at that and not trying to invalidate myself. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I didn't talk so much about this phenomenon called internalized racism and the ways in which the experiences that we have get internalized. So if somebody does something negative toward us, then we start to believe it about ourselves. So thank you. Thank you for making the decision to let that go, to interrupt that, and to support your sister and somebody else to interrupt the ways that the racism gets internalized. Thank you so much. Who was 2?
We've started in Arkansas to build coalitions with Barbara's sister in East Arkansas. We started, Robert, my partner, in the Citizens Climate Lobby in Northwest Arkansas, wanting to get the message out about climate change, began making presentations around the state, and we became very good friends with groups from the Citizens First Congress in East Arkansas, mostly African Americans. Well, as we began making presentations, these are very active groups, very dedicated, informed people, and we started hearing about educational issues, voting rights issues, economic justice, and environmental justice issues. And I began to get very clear that we could not solve the climate crisis unless we also dealt with racial equity. And I'm seeing that more and more because marginalized people are kept marginalized because those in power do not want their votes to count. And so everything will be done to prevent these people from voting. And so we have actually started plans for listening tours through South and East Arkansas in order to discuss environmental justice, racial equity, and climate change issues.
Okay, thank you. Right. 3? Who was 3?
Me. I'm not sure. Yeah. It's a little hard act to follow. I'm Linda Padgett from Santa Rosa, California, and with my two partners, who were good listeners, I was able to hear myself kind of develop this as the words came out. And I thought of, my first reaction was that I was sad that other people from my chapter weren't here in the room to hear this wonderful information, and then I thought, okay, I can share it with them, a couple people in particular, and then I realized we're in the process. Well, another reaction was, well, we don't have a very diverse community, and I realized we have a very large percentage of Latinos in Santa Rosa that we have not reached out to, and that was an opportunity, and we're doing a kind of a goals exercise, goals and objective exercise for our chapter right now, and that I could introduce this as a goal and objectives and see who wants to join me as I pass on this information. So I'm very grateful to be here. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Who is for?
Hi, my name is LaKyla. I'm from Durham, North Carolina. And I had never really thought about an accountability circle in more of a formal sense. I have had conversations with my friends and my family and things like that about how to fix things like racism and inequality and, microaggressions that had happened. But this really made me kind of think about it in a more formal, I don't want to say robotic, but less personal setting. And I felt that maybe by meeting with someone from both your personal life and your work life, maybe once every other week or so, you could begin to start dialogue about things like that. And it doesn't have to be, it could be like in a coffee shop or something like that, about things that happen either in your life or in your week that you would like to address or see if they had similar situations. And then once you all kind of become too comfortable with each other, maybe encourage them to bring in someone from their personal life and their work life. So then, one, you can diversify the information, and two, you can have a larger audience to be able to reach more people in their lives and in your life as well. And so maybe in doing all of that, you can come to some conclusions and have closure in different aspects and areas of your life, both in your professional or educational world, depending on if you're a student or not, and in your own personal relationships.
Thank you. Thank you. That was 4, 5.
I'm Dick Lon. I'm from Crofton, Maryland. And I was actually here a year ago when I heard Barbara's presentation and was really moved. And after I went up to her and said, it would be great if you came to Annapolis. And I've been wrestling with that and how to do it and what to do. And I've talked to several people about it, including the head of, I'm a member of the NAACP, also the head of the Anne Arundel County chapter. And I came here today because after this meeting, I'm meeting with Barbara, and we're going to talk about how this might happen and try to come up with a plan. I guess that's the main thing I want to say. My county, I can tell you, is racist from the highest levels. And it's very disturbing to me.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Deirdre Courtney, and I am from Portage, Michigan, by way of Detroit, Michigan. First of all, thank you, Dr. Love, for challenging me. I pick on my students all the time to do the same exact thing. My group, we just simply talked about the differences in how you handle someone that continues to address or talk in racist ways, and you know, you can how you handle that differently as it relates to personal relationships versus work relationships. I'm someone that is constantly inundated with racist comments as it relates to people that I work with. However, because I have an anthropology background, I know that I don't tend to take these things personal because I know that this is the way that people are typically socialized. So basically what I plan to do and what I'll do differently in terms of being accountable is just intruding or interrupting racist talk. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Who is next? 7.
My name's Ken Forsberg. I live here in DC. I'm from Wisconsin. And I'm kind of new to CCL, so I'm not actually, I haven't been to a chapter meeting. I'm not doing a lot of kind of volunteer outreach right now. But my wife and I have an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old. And thanks to some prompting by my conversation partners, my accountability plan, is to have my wife be an accountability partner in terms of trying to talk more and kind of have more explicitly on our agenda of things to talk about, like how we're parenting our kids and how our parenting decisions are affecting, what is teaching them about relationships across some of these boundaries.
I'll hang on to that. I'm next. Hi, I'm Ken Denson from St. Louis, Missouri. And I also had the privilege of being at Barbara's session last year. And I kind of set myself a goal of, I mostly do presentations and outreach independently of being involved with other things. And so I set myself a goal of trying to basically bring people together and talk about these kinds of things. And I would, by having an amazing friend who was, I'm in a very kind of upper class, pretty white area of the St. Louis region, and have a friend who is kind of a cornerstone of a different area, and so was able to get together. The goal was to bring together people of both sides of those, and started with climate justice, and then along with the lines there, then we talked about mass incarceration a couple of different times and economic justice and stuff. So I've been able to set up those situations to have to have those things happen across race and culture in this case. But the thing that I sit here as I was thinking of is a sort of but we've talked about it, but we haven't set up anything to actually start working together. So I think more than accountability dialogue is trying to think through, okay, now how can we turn this into relationships that are actually working together towards making something happen? So.
Thank you. Thank you. So we can do this together. We can do something about climate change. We can, who asked me that question, that impossible question about affect political parties. We can do that. We can change this world. We can do that. So I'm going to actually close with a story. I hope I told the same story last year. Before I do that, I'm going to ask 4 people who didn't say something in this last round to say one thing you're taking away from this session. So I'm just going to find you one thing you're taking away from this session.
Right on the spot like that? Have to let my fear go. I realize that. Yeah. I have been having discussions with people about that. I am someone who has learned a lot throughout my years, and I no longer have to be afraid to interact with people, especially even more if they are different from me.
Thank you.
I think one of the things that I realized that and talked about is we all, as white people, grow up with ingrained racism. And through friendships, through other relationships, that when I know somebody, that can go away, because it becomes the difference of knowing. When we know each other, we get past that. So for me, I think it's taking responsibility for that and just recognizing it when it rears its ugly head. And this is living in Northwest Philadelphia, where, you know, just in Philadelphia, as a white person, I am a minority by choice to be there. And it's a place I'm comfortable. And so in relationships, that, you know, is inside me, is there, and I can also let it go.
Thank you. One thing you're taking away from this session.
Okay, I said to my last conversation partners that sometimes I don't want to go out and be in social situations because I feel like I'm going to get like these, what do you call it, like racist treatment, not necessarily intentionally, but just sort of the same things of, you know, automatically talking to you about your country or, you know, these kind of things. Yeah, and of course, like, I don't feel comfortable confronting that. So I think that's a fear I need to let go of and be like, it is fine for me to speak up and also to like be out there more and like not think that I will only have negative experiences.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, what am I going to take away from this? I guess I want to be very aware that I don't come off as preachy, inadvertently preachy. So when I go out with even carbon fee and dividend, which is great news, but if I come off as a professor talking to little students, no one is going to listen, and we both lose.
There you go. Thank you. Oh, wait, I started with you. I'm going to end with you.
But I just... No,
Who didn't I? I'm going to end with somebody who didn't say something.
I guess one thing that I'm taking away is this is all probably, we all have our own journey. We're constantly learning and trying to get better, and hopefully we have people who help us, and maybe not. I think I am definitely still in a place in my journey where I do want that, you know, you're an okay white person encouragement, and I think I'm gonna work through that, focus on working through that.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. So I said I would end with a story. It's gonna be two. So one, because I thought of this before and I didn't share it, but it's a story about, here's the story. So I live in Amherst, Massachusetts. When I moved to Amherst 40 years ago, there weren't a whole lot of black people in Amherst. And here's the important thing. There were not a lot of places to get chicken wings. And I loved chicken wings. So this was not 40 years ago, it was a little bit later, but my daughter was 2 at the time. And one of the 3 places in town where you could get chicken wings was the pub. So I called up the pub, I ordered chicken wings. I went with my daughter to pick up my chicken wings. They weren't ready, so we had to sit at the bar and wait for the wings to get ready. There's one seat at the bar. I put my 2-year-old daughter in it. I'm standing behind her waiting for my chicken wings. And she said, "Mommy, who is this?" and put her hands on the knee of the man sitting in the seat next to her. So my ticker tape went, "I don't know, and that's a white man, get your hand off him." That was my ticker tape. But I had learned by then to let my ticker tape run, keep my mouth shut. And I could have a minute to let my ticker tape go by and see what else came. So what came was, "Baby, Mommy doesn't know who that is. And if you want to know, you'll have to ask them." Where it came from, I don't know. But she did. She looked at him and she said, "Who are you?" And he told her. And they had a conversation. To this day, I have no idea what they talked about because my ticker tape is running. Remember, I'm a little black girl from Arkansas. And my ticker tape is going, "My God, my baby is talking to this white man. I don't even know who he is." And on and on and on. I said, what's the story? The story is so much of our past binds our present and keeps us from being who we want to be in the world and doing what we want to do in the world. But we have a fresh, bright new opportunity to step outside the binding of that past. You have decided that you want to create the conditions for legislation that does something about climate change. And you have the opportunity to figure out how to make that happen, and in particular, through making relationships with many kinds of people. I'm so glad you did it. Have at it. And here's my last story. Some of you heard it before. This is a story about an old woman who lived in a village and who was reported to be very wise. And in this village, there were 2 boys who said, "Nobody can be all that wise, and we're going to prove it." So they cooked up a plan. They said, "Here's what we're going to do. We're going to go into the forest and find a bird. And we will approach the old woman holding the bird in our hands behind our back. And we will ask her what we are holding. She will never guess, and we'll prove that she's not so wise. But suppose she guesses that we're holding a bird. We'll ask her if the bird is alive or if the bird is dead. And if she says that the bird is alive, well, we'll break its neck and hold out a dead bird, and she'll be wrong. And if she says the bird is dead, well, we'll hold out a live bird, and she'll be wrong. So any way it goes, we'll prove that she's wrong, and she can't be all that wise. So they had a plan that could not fail. They went into the forest, they got a bird, they approached the old woman, they held the bird in their hand behind the back, and they said, "Old woman, tell us, what are we holding in our hand? And she thought, and she thought, and she thought, and finally she said, "You're holding a bird." Now, they didn't expect that, but nevertheless, their plan was foolproof, and they said, "Tell us, old woman, is the bird alive or is the bird dead?" So she thought, and she thought, and finally she said, "The bird's future is in your hands." Okay, there you go. Thank you very much. I've loved having the afternoon with you. Carry on.